It was with the peculiar sensation deep within my belly that I first laid eyes on Mourning Wood. It rose up proud and erect in front of me like an unrestrained wall of nature. The trees thrust upwards into the skies like giant lances, penetrating the blue beyond. And though there was no expression of protest, I believe I heard a faint murmur of acquiescence in the air, as if Mother Nature was herself sighing in submission to its dominion. The trees appeared like a towering inferno in a blaze of red, orange, gold and brown foliage. Odd that said foliage should reflect autumn in the midst of a fine summer's day. Some leaves dropped free, some danced on the breeze in a downward spiral, but the branches remained inexplicably full and lush and strangely fertile. Evening was drawing on as, with my knapsack on my back, I approached the nearest inn, fatigued from the penultimate 12-mile stretch of my summer sojourn through the Yorkshire Dales, and grateful of the promise of a hot evening meal and a comfortable bed for the night. It was my habit to spend the summer semester break from Tulsa College, Oxbridge, wandering the lesser-known trails of my beloved rural Yorkshire. It was a quaint, rustic hostelry, befitting the location. The innkeeper's daughter, a comely maid with an excess of generous cleavage, offered me a foaming pewter tankard at table in the inn's comfortable front parlour, and inquired after my doings. Under ordinary circumstances, I should probably have given no thought to the licking of her lips, but she did seem a tad overly familiar. Through the open window the sense of fecundity drifted on the evening air and penetrated my nostrils. I answered that I had spent the previous weeks trekking on foot through a part of the country that was wholly unknown to me, that this was to be my last stop before returning to Tulsa College, where I was engaged in a teaching position, and that I was surprised not to have been forewarned of a woodland of such picturesque beauty, as it was not marked in my guidebook. "I have lived here all my life," she said with a sigh. "I know little of the world beyond. You say 'tis idyllic, but it is my everyday experience." "Then you should consider yourself most fortunate," I rejoined. "Perhaps," she replied with a faint smile. "Would you like to order food? We have but a limited menu." I ordered, but unwilling to let her dismiss my observation, I continued, "There is something of enchantment nearby, of supernatural enchantment, the wood. It is quite extraordinary." The maiden met my assertion with a slight shudder. She examined me with a deeply piercing gaze. Coming closer to my chair, her ample bosom all a-quiver, she offered in a hushed, almost reverent tone, "You speak of Mourning Wood?" "If that is its name." "Aye." "What else, then?" "You would do well to keep your distance." Her father appeared then, a big, bearded brute of a man who ordered his daughter back into the kitchen. She glanced at me in parting as though there were many things that she wished to tell me, but said nothing, and with a servile nod to her father exited the room. "Your quarters are ready," he announced. "My repast?" I queried. "Will be brought to your room," he grunted. I took hold of my knapsack and followed him up the stairs. The innkeeper was a huge, muscular and profoundly masculine animal, bristling with hair. In one ear he wore a golden earring, an altogether intimidating presence. He would not have looked out of place at the helm of a pirate ship. "Here," he said, pushing open the door to my room with a hand as big as a shovel. My lodgings were both spacious and comfortable. Am I the only guest? I asked. You are, he grunted. But the locals will be in at 8 or thereabouts if you want for local colour. Then he left. I washed, then dined, then ordered up a jug of ale, but kept to my room. The bed would prove to be exceedingly comfortable and provide welcome respite. I realised then that I had been pushing myself hard and was indeed a day ahead of my schedule, as I luxuriated between the crisp cotton sheets before sleeping soundly throughout the night. The next morning was a Saturday, and feeling invigorated and at liberty, instead of journeying back to town, I reserved the room for a second night and spent the morning wandering about the locale and venturing into the nearby village in the afternoon, where I was to be viewed with a certain curiosity by the inhabitants. I was equally curious of them, for it felt as though I had stepped back in time. Their manners, their language, and even their dress struck me as somewhat anachronistic, though perhaps, given the isolated rural location, it was only to be expected. I appeared to have chanced upon a feast day. Upon the village green, a wedding ceremony of sorts appeared to be taking place, but with multiple couples, 5 in all young and fair. The ceremony bore more resemblance to the pagan traditions than Christian, and was certainly livelier and more joyous than any wedding service I had ever had the pleasure of being a party to. It took the form of a hand-fasting, the binding of hands by a rainbow of coloured cords to symbolise a sacred bond, and with it, the exchange of vows. No rings were exchanged, but instead, each couple had a crown of leaves placed upon their heads, made up of the red, orange, gold, and brown leaves from Mourning Wood. This was followed by them jumping over the besom broom, quaint tradition representing their transition into married life. Throughout the jubilations, much laughter and merriment rang out. Feeling I had intruded long enough, I withdrew from the company and, as the weather was so glorious, thought I would take a dip in a clear crystal pool that I had come across earlier that day. I stripped off my clothes beside it and swam for a while in its cool, refreshing waters, before lying upon a large rock to dry myself in the shimmering sunlight, the air perfumed by wild lavender. My thoughts drifted to Oxbridge, the city of dreaming spires, and Tulsa College, to which I was soon to return. I woke with a start, not knowing how long I had been so exposed, but the sun had waned and the air, though still warm, was cooler now. I hurried to dress, but found to my immense consternation that my clothes had vanished. I searched and searched, but they were nowhere to be found. But how could it be? And what was I to do? Covering my nakedness with both hands and keeping to the shadows, I made my way by stealth the relatively short distance back to the inn, approaching from the rear as a colony of bats filled the night sky overhead. To my immense relief, I saw a washing line strung across the yard, with articles still fluttering in the evening breeze. Thankfully, amidst said articles hanging there were a pair of men's linen drawers, full-legged and overly large, as would have befitted the innkeeper. But with the tightening of the drawstring waist and the rolling up of the legs, they proved sufficient to save my blushes. I entered the hostelry through the kitchen. It was brightly lit, as was the fire, despite the summer heat. In front of this, crammed into a tin bath, was the hulking, naked figure of the innkeeper. His daughter was washing his broad, muscular back. Upon seeing me, he threw back his head and roared with laughter. I went for a swim and my clothes were stolen, I protested. It were the fairies, he rejoined. The fairies? Aye, the fairies of Mourning Wood. They have their eyes on you. Mark me. His daughter looked upon me approvingly. The innkeeper began to rise from the tub. I averted my eyes. I saw the innkeeper's cat then, toying malevolently with a live mouse on the slate floor. Outraged at the innkeeper's churlish behaviour, I stomped up to my room, intent on dressing in my second set of clothes, before continuing on my journey forthwith, but found my knapsack had been ransacked. My clothing gone, such contents as were left were scattered on the floor. It was then that I heard the laughter and the singing from outside. I looked out of the bedroom window and saw a torchlit parade of locals in various states of undress heading up the hill towards the wood. The great cloud of bats I'd seen earlier flew above their heads, blackening the night sky. I ran down the stairs, exiting through the front door, and followed in their wake. I had no intentions of being held a naked hostage, and would reclaim my clothes at any price. Indignation drove me on in the adventure as I followed on the trail of the torchlit procession. I climbed the hill slowly. Once or twice a bat circled over my head, then flew off to rejoin the cauldron of others on high that were, seemingly, headed in the same direction. I followed the winding trail, and the sound of merriment died away as the party entered into the forested enclave, smothered by the dense foliage, reduced to a whispering chorus amongst the branches. I hesitated briefly on the threshold of the woodland and listened acutely. The primitive fragrances of soil and rotting leaves rose up to fill my lungs. Impenetrable darkness confronted me. Only the desire to reclaim my attire drove me to venture forward through the trees. I followed the torchlight into the heart of the grove, and at length came to a comparatively open space, where the trees made way for a bonfire and gave further space to the evening's event. An inner circle formed by the 5 couples who had wed on the village green held hands and danced in wild abandon around the fire, whilst the outer circle looked on with beaming smiles. I ducked down behind a moss-covered boulder to observe proceedings. I was thus permitted to become a spectator to the unfolding events. It was then that, to my utter incredulity, I saw that the bats that now swooped low were not bats at all, but fairies. It was as if they had switched on an inner light and were revealed in a rainbow of colours, all aglow and quite beauteous to behold. "Come drink the wine," cried the master of ceremonies. "Go forth and multiply." A cheer went up, and those assembled drank deep, tossed aside their goblets and discarded what was left of their clothing before, piling on top of one another in an unbridled, undulating heap. I felt a huge hand clasp the back of my neck, and despite my resistance, hoist me to my feet. "Oh!" cried the innkeeper, as he ripped off my drawers with his free hand and tossed me into the fray. I was passed from hand to hand then, like a plaything, utterly ravaged. Sparks flew from the bonfire into the night air, and the flames burned twice as bright. Above our heads the luminous wings of the fairy host glimmered and glowed, and the tinkling laughter urged us on. At length I was discarded like a broken toy on the damp earth as the orgy raged on. And in that moment I knew that whilst I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, I would never go home again.